He was disgusting. 3 words. That's all it took for the world to stop and ask. Did Cher really just say that about Sonny Bono? For decades, they were seen as Hollywood's golden duo, Sonny and Cher, the inseparable icons whose love story lit up America's television screens. But behind those matching bell-bottoms and million-dollar smiles, something darker was brewing. And now, at 79, Cher isn't holding anything back. What she's finally admitting about Sonny Bono has left fans heartbroken, furious, and in total disbelief. Because the truth is nothing like the story we thought we knew. They were the picture of 1960s pop culture perfection. Sonny and Cher, partners on stage, in marriage, and in the eyes of an entire generation. When I Got You Babe hit the airwaves in 1965, it wasn't just a hit, it was an anthem. It captured a moment in time, a kind of rebel romance that millions of couples wanted to believe in. And at the center of it all, a 19-year-old Cher, wide-eyed, radiant, and head over heels for a man 11 years older. Sonny Bono wasn't just her husband. He was her manager, mentor, producer, and gatekeeper. He saw Cher as a star before the world did. He packaged her, styled her, shaped her into a brand. And it worked. Their variety show, The Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour, was a smash. Audiences tuned in weekly, not just for the music, but for the chemistry. The playful digs, the on-screen flirtation, the sense that these two truly had each other's backs. But that's just what America saw. Behind the scenes, the reality was far less romantic. Cher has since described that time as feeling owned, controlled, managed down to her every move. "I was young," she once said, "and he was the boss of everything." It wasn't love as most people understood it, it was business. And while Cher smiled through the scripts and sang her way through stadiums, she was also silently suffocating under Sonny's control. He was known to make all the decisions without consulting her. Contracts, music rights, finances, even her wardrobe. If Cher had a problem with it, he didn't want to hear it, and she didn't feel like she was allowed to speak up. But back then, women in the industry didn't have the voice they do now. Especially not women in marriages built around his vision. Especially not Cher. And yet, she stayed. Because walking away from Sonny meant walking away from the entire world they had built. So she kept quiet. She let the myth of Sonny and Cher grow, even when the love behind it was slowly fading. But if the curtain was already closing, why did Cher stay so long? And what really made her finally walk away? As the 1970s progressed, cracks in the Sonny and Cher fairytale became impossible to ignore. Cher began speaking more candidly in interviews, even if just in passing, about how little control she had over her own life. "I didn't even know how much money I was making," she said once. Sonny handled everything. And by everything, she meant everything. He was the one signing the deals, managing the tours, owning the rights not just to their brand but in many ways to her identity. Their marriage, she would later admit, wasn't built on equality. It was built on control. She described it as being like a prisoner in her own relationship. Friends noticed the change in her demeanor. How Cher, once outspoken and full of fire, had started shrinking into Sonny's shadow. Professionally, Sonny was still presenting them as a united front. But personally, Cher was drowning. "He was manipulative," she said. "He made me believe I couldn't do anything without him." And for a while, she believed it. She thought her success was entirely tied to Sonny's decisions, Sonny's connections, Sonny's ideas. She thought walking away would mean the end of her career, and possibly the end of herself. But something began to shift. The more she was told she couldn't, the more she realized she had to. In 1974, after years of emotional and creative suffocation, Cher did the unthinkable. She filed for divorce. And that's when the real battle began. Because Sonny didn't just fight back, he fought dirty. In legal documents, he made a stunning admission that he had been keeping 95% of their earnings, while Cher received only 5%. To the world, Sonny had always played the harmless, funny man with the mustache and the goofy grin. But now, He looked like a man who had been quietly exploiting his wife behind the scenes for nearly a decade. Cher was devastated, not just by the financial betrayal, but by the realization that she had never been in control of her own life. Not really. When she tried to reclaim her independence, Sonny tried to block her from using the name Cher. He tried to stop her from launching a solo career. He even tried to prevent her from performing certain songs. But Cher pushed forward anyway. She wasn't the same girl he had discovered years ago. She had been through it, and she was finally done being quiet. Her solo career exploded. She won awards. She starred in films. She became her own icon. But even with all her success, she never truly talked about Sonny again. Not really. She kept the truth buried. Even when people asked. Even when fans begged her to write a tell-all. Even when the world tried to revisit their perfect love story. She stayed silent. Until recently. Until Cher, at 78, finally said the words that changed everything. And when she did, the internet exploded. Because the version of Sonny Bono that Cher described wasn't just controlling, he was disgusting. The year was 1998. Sonny Bono, by then a congressman in California, had traded in music for politics. He had seemingly moved on. So had Cher. But when news broke that Sonny had died in a skiing accident at the age of 62, it still shook her to her core. They hadn't spoken regularly in years. Their worlds had drifted apart. And yet, the pain hit like a thunderclap. "I was stunned," Cher said. "Just stunned." What followed was one of the most unexpected and emotional tributes of Cher's career. Standing before Congress, dressed in all black, her voice trembled as she spoke. Some people may think that because Sonny and I weren't together anymore, we weren't close. But we were, in a very unusual way. It was a rare moment. One where grief softened the edges of a once bitter past. She called him the most unforgettable character she'd ever met. She praised his charm, his humor, and his ability to reinvent himself, even after Hollywood had moved on. But behind the elegant tribute was a different kind of sorrow, one that went deeper than nostalgia. Cher would later admit that her eulogy was only part of the truth. Yes, she missed Sonny. Yes, she still loved parts of him. But there was something else eating away at her. A regret she never expected to carry. "There were things I never got to say," she whispered in one quiet interview. "And that still haunts me." Because for all their public drama, Cher had never truly told Sonny how deeply he had hurt her. Not just emotionally, but financially, professionally, spiritually. She never got to tell him how much she had resented the way he handled their divorce. How humiliated she had felt when the world discovered he'd been taking 95% of their income. How angry she was that he had tried to silence her even after the marriage ended. He was gone, and the door to that conversation was closed forever. Fans began digging into old lyrics from Cher's music, and they found something interesting. In songs like "Song for the Lonely," some interpreted a deep, haunting sadness, a sense of unresolved grief. "This is a song for the lonely / can you hear me tonight?" Was she singing to him? Had her pain, buried for years, finally begun to seep into her art? One thing was clear, she wasn't ready to talk about it. Yet, years passed. Interviews came and went. Cher dodged the topic or gave polished responses. But behind her carefully measured words, the silence spoke volumes. Until recently, until she finally sat down and said what she really felt. And those 3 words, they sent shockwaves through the internet. "He was disgusting." It wasn't said for drama. It wasn't screamed in anger. It was said quietly, firmly, almost painfully. "He was disgusting," Cher told an interviewer, and the room fell silent. After decades of silence, it was the last thing fans expected to hear from her. But she meant it. Not in the way some assumed, but in a very specific, deeply personal way. She clarified quickly, "Not as a person, as a partner, as a businessman, as someone who used me." It wasn't hate that filled her voice. It was heartbreak, frustration, truth. For years, Cher had kept her lips sealed about the inner workings of their relationship. But now, nearing 80, with a legacy already cemented and nothing left to protect. She was done pretending. "He knew exactly what he was doing," she said. "He created me and then he controlled me. Every dollar I made, every contract I signed, it all went through him. And I thought I was lucky." The word disgusting wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition of how blind she had been and how much damage had been done. Fans were shocked. Social media lit up with reactions. Some defended Sonny, calling Cher's words ungrateful or too harsh. Others, especially women who had lived through similar dynamics in the 60s and 70s, praised her for finally speaking out. "It's about time," one fan wrote. "He treated her like a product." Another tweeted, "Every woman who's ever been underestimated, undervalued, or used by a man she trusted gets this. 100%. But Cher wasn't done. She talked about the emotional confusion of still loving someone who hurt you. "I didn't hate Sonny. That's what made it harder. I loved him, but I was also angry. I didn't have the language back then to understand what was happening. Now I do." It was a powerful statement because it captured something deeper than drama. It captured a generational truth. Many women didn't even realize they were being manipulated until years later. Cher's words became part of a larger cultural conversation. About control. About creative ownership. About love that blurs the line between support and suppression. And while some headlines ran wild with the quote, twisting it into tabloid fodder, those who listened closely understood the gravity behind it. Cher wasn't attacking Sonny's memory. She was reclaiming her own. She was telling the truth not to hurt him, but to finally free herself. "I was afraid to say it for so long," she confessed. "I thought I'd sound bitter, but I'm not bitter. I'm free." And with those words, something shifted. For the first time in decades, Cher stopped carrying the burden of protecting their legacy and started telling her story for what it really was. Not perfect, not romanticized, but real. And in that truth, there was power. Because sometimes, speaking the words you were too afraid to say isn't an act of destruction. It's an act of healing. For all the bitterness, for all the heartbreak, for all the moments Cher stayed silent while the world praised Sonny Bono as a genius and partner, there was still one emotion that lingered: love. Not the kind of love that writes fairy tales. Not the kind that survives divorce or even death. But the kind that stays with you because it's never fully resolved. In a recent sit-down, when asked if she ever stopped loving Sonny, Cher paused. She looked down, took a breath, and said quietly, "No, I didn't. That's what made it worse." The truth is, you can miss someone and still resent them. You can love the version of a person who existed in your memory, even if the reality was messier, more painful, more complicated than the public ever saw. Cher admitted that part of her always hoped Sonny would apologize, that he'd look back and understand how he'd hurt her, not just as a woman, but as an artist, as a partner, as a person. But that moment never came. He passed away before they ever got that conversation. And so Cher had to find closure without him, on her own terms, in her own way. Speaking her truth wasn't about tarnishing Sonny's legacy. It was about taking hers back. Because while the world called her his sidekick, his co-star, his discovery, Cher had always been more. She had survived him. She had outgrown him. She had rebuilt a life without him. And now, decades later, she finally had the words she needed to say. Words like manipulation. Words like control. And yes, words like disgusting. But also words like forgiveness. Like freedom. Like truth. Because that's what this has always been about. Not revenge. Not rewriting history. But finally, at 78 years old, reclaiming it. And maybe giving other women permission to do the same. "I was silent for a long time," she said. "But I'm not silent anymore." Sometimes, the most painful truths are the ones we whisper only when we're finally ready. Cher's story isn't just about heartbreak. It's about survival. It's about finding your voice, even if it takes decades. She may have built a legacy beside Sonny, but she built a life after him. And now, by speaking her truth, She's writing the ending on her own terms. For more of the latest news, check out this video.